we're sitting here diving into the Warriors offseason much earlier than we're used to. And admittedly, the NBA offseason, the rules, the apron, the cap, the first apron, the second apron, the sign and trade, it's so complex that it gets very hard sometimes for us to have reasonable conversations because we're throwing out ideas and we're like, I don't even know if that's allowed.
Right.
So every so often, pretty often, we got to go to our people who actually know what the hell's going on and can figure this out.
Thank God for Pincus.
And this is one of those people, man. This is our guy, Eric Pincus, Bleacher Report, and he wrote all about the problems for the Phoenix Suns. Could the Warriors take advantage of that? Could they be a good match? Good afternoon, Eric. How you been, buddy?
I've been doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. Now, I've already promised my very first question, and it's a bit of a one-off, but we ask it every year, and for some reason, I always forget to ask the people who know. In the NBA, when salaries largely have to match to make trades, what is the value of a first-round draft pick in terms of that salary match?
Oh, in the actual salary match, zero. You don't include the dollars for a draft pick or a drafted player. It's not until they're signed to a contract that you actually include them at what they're making.
Okay, so in other words, if salaries for traded players were off by $20 million, you cannot make up that gap by throwing in picks.
No, not at all. Now, you can sign a player, you have to wait 30 days, then it's their salary.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting that out of the way. Now to the real issue at hand. The Phoenix Suns situation, how likely do you think it is that the option that they will choose is to trade Kevin Durant?
Well, I think that starts with Kevin saying, I don't want to be here. He's a headliner, right? So he's a star player, Hall of Famer eventually. So I think it would take that. Now, they face some really difficult issues, self-inflicted. They went after Beal, added on a giant salary, obviously have Booker, they have Nurkic, and they basically have five players, Grayson Allen. Everybody else, Royce O'Neal they can keep, but it's going to cost a lot of money, not just in his salary, but in the tax they're going to have to pay to keep him. And then everybody else they add is just minimum dudes. And, there are quality minimum players out there, but usually get what you pay for. It's hard to get guys who can really help you all year round and in the playoffs at the minimum. So they could face a situation where they say, hey, let's go for depth. We probably can't trade Beal based on his contract, his no trade clause, injury history. Maybe we don't want to trade Booker based on his age. Younger guy still, under 30. KD, a little bit older. KD maybe decides to push out. That's how I would see it going. But do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. I don't have any intel to say that that's in progress. But is it on that, could happen list? Of course.
Especially when you look, and you detailed it so great in your article, all of the punishments and penalties Phoenix is facing. And I guess similarly, Golden State is by a team that is in that second apron. How motivated will Phoenix be to try to shed some of the salary and get underneath the second apron, which is estimated to be about $190 million?
Well, I don't even know if they realistically can, but if depth is the answer, then the only answer to getting depth is getting rid of one of their main guys. Like if you trade Nurkic, fine, but you don't have enough size as it is. Grayson Allen, they just extended. He's not the problem, and they can't trade him till October. So if most of these moves happen around July, then he's not on that list. The list of things they can do shrinks really quickly. There's just not much they can do outside of just keep the same group together, add minimum guys, keep Royce O'Neal, pay a ton of money, pay some penalties, deal with that second apron, or maybe get out of one of these top three guys, of which we're talking about KD.
Eric Pincus, Bleacher Report with us, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Eric, I'm going to bring everybody into our text conversation from last night, and let's say KD does become available as you suggested. He would have to ask for it. Let's say that happens. What would the Warriors have to offer? And I sort of brought up Wiggins, obviously, to start. You mentioned that Chris Paul would have to be in on that that deal as well. And then you said, I don't know what's in it for Phoenix. And I said, what about picks? So you tell me if a Paul, Wiggins, and picks, let's say 2 picks for Kevin Durant, you tell me, are we at least having a viable conversation?
Well, it's complicated. I mean, I would say this, like whether Paul was in it or they just cut Paul, they would have to get out of Paul. But for the Warriors,
right,
to get KD to make it work legally, they have to commit for the season as an under the first apron team, right? So we were talking about the second apron, which is this upper bound, right? Well, now we're talking about this other line projects to be about 188 million. The second apron's about 199 million. So that's where the Warriors have been. That's where the Suns are above that second one, but it's that first one. The Warriors would have to commit for the entire year next season to be below 188 roughly. And so that limits what you can do. So you start by getting out of Wiggins. You probably cut Chris Paul, and then they have guys like Looney. They have Gary Payton II. Then you start looking at, well, like, are they moving maybe a Kuminga, a Moses Moody? I mean, if you're the Suns and you can get a Kuminga and get out of money and get some picks, it's at least a conversation. I don't know that it happens, but at least you could talk about it. As far as the Warriors and their picks, there's something called a Stepien rule where you can't trade. You have to have certain picks. You can't just trade all your picks, right? So they can pick in this draft. Now, right now, they have, let's see, the Warriors, man, they're after this draft, basically, assuming that they give their pick, they don't win the lottery. They're not going to win the lottery. So but if they don't win the lottery, it goes to Memphis. Now their picks open up a little bit. Now they could trade 25, they could trade 26, 27, 20, 29, but they have to have one every other year. So it's a couple of picks. It's not like a crazy number, but it's something. And so, yeah, the picks exist. If you're Golden State, if you're including a Kuminga, a Moody, along with Wiggins, and it's a commitment, on the Suns, Wiggins isn't cheap, but he's certainly cheaper than KD, and maybe you're adding depth. I don't know that they care about picks, but at least maybe they could trade those picks or get another team involved who wants those picks and get more help, because the Suns just need bodies, good players, in volume.
And this would mean letting Klay walk, for sure, right?
Well, not necessarily. It's doable, but his salary might be $15 million or something like that. It depends on the exact. I ran it with the premise that they keep Klay. They go back to what was. You know what I mean? They go back to the KD, Klay, Draymond, Steph, and keep Pajemski probably and whoever else they can keep. But yeah, Klay may not be happy about it, and another team may offer him more. But I mean, again, he's older. He's making a lot. He wants a lot of money, but I don't know who's willing, because there's just not a lot of teams that have money. And most of the teams have money. The only one that's like a real playoff team is Philadelphia. Everybody else is like, Charlotte. They're like rebuilding, or the Jazz. I don't see what you could argue Orlando. Orlando's got cap room, and they're a playoff team. So maybe Orlando, maybe Dallas somehow finds a way, but I don't even see how that works. So I think it's theoretically possible to go back to what was with, but does KD want that? That's a different story. I don't know.
What would the timing be on this? Because the Chris Paul decision's not until the end of June, and the free agency's July 1. And don't the Warriors have to get below that second apron before they'll have the flexibility to even make this sort of a move?
Sure, absolutely. And that's all. Technically, it flips on July 1st, but you're in a moratorium until July 6th. So all of the decisions, like the Chris Paul decision, let's say they needed to opt him in, or it's not even an option. If they need to guarantee some of his money, they can. And I mean, look, if Chris is probably just going to get cut before July, that opens up a lot of that money. If they do negotiate a deal, they could guarantee half, they could guarantee $5 million, they could guarantee the whole thing. But a team taking him would have to account for his full contract. So it's a little complicated, but they have the flexibility. They have the power to do it. I still see that, Lacob, one of the owners, said that, getting under the taxes, plan A or plan 1 or plan A, B, whatever it is.
Right.
It's something that I've modeled, and I wrote about it what it might look like, and they can certainly keep Klay and get under the tax and even keep Wiggins or maybe make a trade. But I do think getting below the tax is a priority, but if you can add KD back, you could certainly argue they go in a different direction and say, all right, maybe this is our last chance. Let's just go 2 more years, however long we have till Steph is done, and see if we can get another.
Super interesting stuff. Eric Pincus, Bleacher Report, with us here on Willard and Dibs. Eric, can I go back to a comment you made in there when I asked you about Klay? Because I think our listeners' eyebrows probably went up when you said, yeah, they could keep Klay, but he'd have to probably take 15. He might not be happy about it. That number feels incredibly low. What do you think his market is this offseason?
Well, there's 2 different questions there. Like, what's his market, and what are the Warriors willing to pay him in relation to the market? Because sometimes the market's low, but there's a reason a team will pay a player above market, right? Like, they may want to pay him 20 or 22 or something like that. I don't know the exact figure, but I came up with a path if they traded Wiggins, or even if they didn't, they might be able to get out of Gary Payton. There are ways to get him up to about 20-ish. But if you look at the market, like, the mid-level exception is what everybody has, most teams have, not the high payroll teams, but most teams have about $13 million to spend. That's sort of the line, right? Now you have about 6-ish, 7 teams or so that are below the cap that have real money. That might be Orlando, it might be Toronto, certainly Detroit, and some of the other teams we mentioned Charlotte, Utah. But I mean, Detroit's a mess. Like, should they be spending all their money on Klay Thompson?
Right.
Like, the Spurs might have a little money, right? But should they go spend it on Klay to be a shooter around Wembanyama when they've got like Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, and desperately need help at point guard? So it just real quickly whittles down. Like, I could argue Orlando could use some shooting, wouldn't hurt to get a shooter. Is Klay the right age and fit for them right now? It may be on a short deal. I could squeeze my mind into it. Maybe the Sixers strike out with Paul George, decide they don't want Buddy Hield back, think they want a shooter that has more experience in the playoffs. Maybe it's Klay. Maybe they go for Klay for 20 and somebody else for 20, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a pathway where he might get paid. But I mean, the reality is he's had some serious injuries, and he's probably worth more to the Warriors than he is probably to anyone else. The idea of Klay, I mean, hell, everyone loves Klay, but the reality of like 6, 7 teams that have very limited time to use that money, and they're going to, rebuilding teams just have no interest in why Klay Thompson. So, and that's without even looking at, well, who else is out there? There are other guys out there that might get paid. So is Klay the number one guy who's going to get that money, or is it going to go to someone else? So that's the question.
Fantastic breakdown from Eric Pincus
really
there,
good.
because the teams that can't afford him can't really use him like the Warriors could, so therefore his price goes down. What about the market for Andrew Wiggins? We've debated it here. We see him up close, and we see him coming and going and playing and not playing. What is the league-wide view of where Andrew is as a player?
Well, I think they looked at, I know that other teams told me that he was at least shopped around at the deadline. They at least tried to gauge his value. Obviously, nothing happened. And I do think if you look at his numbers, 2 years ago, All-Star, the next year missed a lot of time, still put up great numbers, still shot just as well from 3. This year, he went from about a 17 or so point a game guy to about 13. 3-point shooting dropped. I could easily see someone saying, the Warriors were just not as good. It was situation. You put him, again, like Philadelphia. You're like, we got Joel Embiid, we got Tyrese Maxey. We want to replace Tobias Harris. And we have a ton of money. And we're going to go after Paul George, but say Paul George extends with the Clippers. Now, who do they go after? They go after Klay, or maybe you say to the Warriors, hey, we'll take Wiggins off your hands. We're not going to give you much. We'll just take him. And maybe the Warriors look at that and say, hey, that's a pathway to us getting our books in order. Maybe we get some, I came up with a theoretical where they get like Malcolm Brogdon and Robert Williams III, which is, he's hurt this year, but man, I mean, if that kid's healthy, he's like a younger version of Looney, would totally help that team as far as a defensive big. And Brogdon's like maybe not an all-star, but Brogdon's like a 40-ish, 38-ish, whatever percent three-point shooter, plays either guard position, bigger guard, can defend, has playoff experience. It's at least an idea, and then that allows you to pay Klay to stay. So these are the sort of things that, like, there's no answer because, like, teams don't know what's going to happen yet, right? They haven't had those conversations, but it's time now for teams and agents and everybody involved to start planning this stuff out. And really, by the draft, most of this stuff's figured out. By the time we get to July, right, July 1st, most of it's done. So we could say, oh, this is down the road. We shouldn't be talking about this yet. It's like, no, we're talking about within 6 weeks, most of this is going to be decided. By 8 weeks, it's going to be done.
Man, I'm gigging on this right now. Eric Pincus is with us here on 95.7 The Game. Okay, Eric, let's go there because you just kind of threw out another idea, and I think we'd all love to hear more of that. Like, there's been all this KD conversation. You just threw out Brogdon and Williams. Sure, we don't know how it's going to go, but what are some other possible scenarios that would allow the Warriors to make significant acquisitions? Who could they be?
Mm-hmm. Well, that last proposition also got them under the tax. So you're doing that. You're keeping Klay, and you're taking care of their finances to try to help them get out of the money. Now, fans don't usually care about that. All right, it's not like their money, but at the same time, like the Warriors their payroll's just too high. So it would be nice to get that kind of flexibility. But I think their big decisions are like, is Kuminga the guy that they're going to pay? Because his decision is this summer. They need to either extend him or not, and that decision comes before the start of next season. So we're talking about, mid-October, mid to late October. So about 5 months from now. But that decision needs to be made, at least in theory. They could agree to a deal in July. So knowing that number would help what direction they're going. Similarly with Moody. So you have to decide, who are you keeping? And if you're keeping, obviously Steph and Dre, then it's, well, who are you surrounding them with? Are they keeping, Kuminga, Jackson Davis? Who's sticking around? And then I don't see a world where they're paying Chris Paul $30 million. Now, you can guarantee a part of it. Like I said, you can include him in a trade. They have the ability that if they're going to stay in this upper money area, then we start talking like we did about the Suns, where they are facing restrictions. But if you got Chris Paul and if you're willing to trade him to someone, you could take up to $30 million back. So but you have to have somebody who's willing to pay Chris Paul $30 million or a portion of it. So there's flexibility. We'd have to go through and look at every team and who's expendable, but there are restrictions. They can't take more than they're sending out. You still have those same picks we talked about for KD. They're going to be available to add. So I'd have to go through the list of who's really available. Obviously, guys like, people think Trey is going to be available. I don't think that's the right guy for the Warriors. Donovan Mitchell, some people say, that's kind of crazy, but sure. I'd have to see how that works. I don't know if that works because of how much money he's making. That's the trick, because they can't. It's like KD. If you're adding a guy and they're making more than someone you're sending out, now you got to be under that first apron. So if I look over at Cleveland, Donovan's making 35.4 next year. So there's no way to trade for him because you can't take Chris Paul at 30 and say like, oh, we'll add Moody, and that's 35.8, right? So that's we're setting out almost 36, bringing back 35. They can do that. They can do that under the first apron, but not the second. So there are different lines. Woo. The rules are complex. Yeah, and it's what's interesting is that the new rule. We have a new CBA last year, but they gave teams about a year to sort of adjust to the new rules, and they don't really kick in hard until July. And so it's just going to be interesting to sort of experience free agency and trade season under these new rules and see what teams do a really good job and which teams do a really bad job, because that's going to happen. It's just inevitable. Some teams are going to kill it, and some teams are going to be looking at them and going, what the hell did you just do? That's just the nature of things. So excited to find out. Warriors could go a lot of directions.
Yeah.
Seriously. They could say, let's just sell tickets and not compete, or they could go invest, try to get someone for money, pay money out like they've been doing out the wazoo. And if that's the plan, fans will be happier because they want that. But, spending money isn't always the way to success anyway. Maybe it is time to start to invest more in the Kumingas and the younger guys. And let Steph just be the the leader of that group.
Yeah, before you go, is Markkanen in a conversation? What's going on with him?
The buzz on Markkanen is that the Jazz are going to use their cap room that they have to renegotiate and extend him.
Okay.
Now, nothing is done. It's not a lock, but the buzz is that they're going to lock him up, similar to what the Pacers did with Sabonis this last year. Or not the Pacers, the Kings did with Sabonis, where you give a guy a raise and extend him. It's a way of manipulating the system with cap room. So instead of improving via adding talent, you make sure you got your main guy locked in. That's what I anticipate. So now if he says, I'm not doing it and I want to leave, now we have a different conversation. But I don't think Utah considers moving him unless he drives that.
Eric, fantastic.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on, man.
Anytime. Appreciate it.
Eric Pincus, Bleacher Report.